Okay. I'm going to call this meeting to order, our staff meeting of January the 20th, 2026. We have a couple very important items on our agenda, and so we're just going to get started. And the first item on our agenda is Springfield Township TIF districts. And coming before us is Chris Gilbert, Springfield Township Administrator, and Kathleen Kennedy, Assistant Administrator. And if you'd like to introduce anyone else that's with you today, that would be great.
Commissioners, we do have one of our elected officials with us, and Lisa Youngblood, and then also one of our residents and former trustee, Lynn McFarland.
Okay, great.
I had no idea she was coming.
Okay, great.
Moral support, I guess.
Thank you.
So I appreciate it. As you're aware, obviously we provided some information prior to the meeting, letting you know what's happening in Springfield Township. We're lucky enough that we have several projects that have come before us that necessitate, we believe, a TIF district in order to make the developments happen in the manner in which we would like to see them. In addition to that, it will provide some benefit to the community and some additional capital, as well as benefit to the school districts that you'll see here in just a second. In Springfield Township, we are a bedroom community. As some of you may know, we were built out in the 50s and 60s, somewhat in the 70s. And if I had to do it over again, the township wouldn't be developed in the manner that it is, where we're predominantly residential. And being built out, we're sort of landlocked in the sense that we don't have additional land to do a lot of development. And what has happened over the last few decades, we've seen that lack of healthy housing stock rotation that any healthy community needs, in the sense that we have a lot of affordable starter homes. We have a good amount of upper mobility sort of family homes. The problem is we didn't have the empty nester product that we needed in order to create that rotation of housing stock, because what happens is people would move in these houses, they want to stay in the community, but they didn't have a place to move down to, and that rotation just didn't happen. As you can see here, the township, this is an example of a house that was just recently sold in the township as we consider affordable starting home. Affordable nowadays is a relative term than what we imagine it to be. 3-bedroom, 1-bath house constructed in the early 50s, sold for $205,000 just last year. The more traditional family home you see here, built in the early 60s, 5-bed, 3.5-bath, sold for $421,000 and $24,000. That's the predominant sort of housing product we have in the township, is those two sort of ends of the spectrum. And you can see here, over the last 20 years, we have less than 200 permits issued for single family. That includes townhome projects that we had as well. And it also includes some more affordable housing that we worked with Habitat for Humanity for in one of our particular neighborhoods. That is included in that 199 as well. We have just under 15,000 housing units. The median home value is $225,000, and you see that is below the Hamilton County median of $260,000. So we do have affordable housing. What we need to do is create additional housing to free up some of that affordable housing for people to move into. You can see in West College Hill, as I mentioned, we did work with Hamilton County, the Land Bank, and Habitat for Humanity to build 28 new homes in the Steel Sub, as we affectionately call it, over the last 5 to 10 years. We obviously worked with them to do, and you see Gwen there. I didn't expect her to be here, but that was completely coincidental. That we worked with Habitat for Humanity to revitalize the neighborhood as well, in addition to the 28 affordable homes we created in that neighborhood. So what are the developments that came before us and that we're looking to do TIF districts, and why is that? The Lake Ridge Park neighborhood that is being proposed will feature 145 new homes. 67 of those will be single-family detached, 78 will be townhomes, and it is located just off McKelvey Road at Lake Ridge Drive, just south of Winwoods Park. The next project, and we'll get into these more specifically, is the off of Winton Road, the Whitaker Condo Community, the former site of the Whitaker Elementary School, part of the Finneytown School District. That will be 60 owner-occupied condominiums. Then if you look at Lakeside Park, which is just to the east of the first development I mentioned, and I know they're confusing, Lake Ridge Park, Lakeside Park, I'm sure we're going to mess that up in the future. 184 new homes, 123 detached, and 61 townhomes. Again, trying to provide that market for housing that we don't typically have. And the first development, which we'll get into, which is Lake Ridge Park, you'll see is going to provide two different housing styles, land dominium and what we call the cottage empty nester style, which this is 100% HOA maintained, meaning if you want low, high amenity, low responsibility, this is where you'd move down to. So that person living in that 5-bedroom would move into this, freeing up the 5-bedroom for the person living in the starter home, and then obviously new families moving into the starter home from outside the township is the goal. Again, it has a friendly layout, a lot of green space, which we'll get into here in a second. Additionally, just south of the park, which we think is a great amenity, and you can see there again, you can barely see the shaded area to the top in the center of that map. That's where the location is, just off McKelvey Road. Moving on, the Whitaker condo community, that is just on the former 6.5-acre side of the Whitaker Elementary School that Finneytown Schools tore down. They came to us with an idea to develop this property. They have a lot of capital needs at this point, so they want to dispose of this property, bring in a new tax revenue, and then also through the TIF revenue perspective, glean some additional revenue to help them with their capital expenditures that they have when they're rebuilding their new 7 through 12 campus. What we're looking at here is a modern aesthetic, 60 owner-occupied units. Again, this is something desperately needed in the township, especially in this part of Hamilton County. We don't see this type of product, and we believe that it will greatly help and foster that rotation of housing stock that we desperately need. And again, that is just in front of the 45-acre nature preserve that the township has. Lakeside Park, so another development just to the east of the first one. This one is 123 detached homes, as you see there, with various styles from a cottage style up to a more traditional single-family home, and then 61 townhomes as well, you see there at the bottom. Again, low maintenance lifestyle. Again, strategic location as well. It's just south of an existing subdivision. This was always planned to be a phase of this particular development from the back in the early 90s. The issue has been for a long time that this particular part of the property is very expensive to develop, which again is also necessitating the need for the TIF. So, why do we need TIF and what is it going to enable? It's going to offset some of the costs of the required infrastructure and development standards that we put in place. So the township required in these developments, because we always look at these as sort of permanent decisions when we look at and approve developments in our community. We want to make sure that they have a viable and sustainable future in terms of holding their property value. So we limit the density, we increase the green space, which holds property values, and then additionally, we require certain construction materials like clapboard siding and brick and stone. And then there were some utility infrastructure mandates made by MSD because a lot of these surrounding areas don't have public sewer. So they've seen this as an opportunity to extend the public sewer so that additional existing residents can tap into that. That's an added cost to the developer that was obviously not known and planned prior to the construction being proposed. So we're hoping that the TIF revenue will help us offset some of those costs related to those development expenditures. Additionally, we want to, as a township, work with the Great Parks and Hamilton County Engineers Office to develop pedestrian trails from that portion of the township into Winton Woods Park. Believe it or not, right now, if you live adjacent to Winton Woods Park, you have to get in a car and drive there. We feel like this is an opportunity for us now, without affecting our general fund operating revenue, to work with those two entities to create walking trails, not only from the new developments, but existing communities, to allow our residents to access one of the county's greatest assets, which is Winton Woods Park. Additionally, we know that in Hamilton County, we compete with communities in different counties for quality of life and amenities. And we want to make sure that we utilize some of this revenue on our township campus to create a quality of life park and amenities that will draw families in and make them want to stay in the community and stay in the county. So when you look at pickleball courts and parks and dog parks and things, we want to create a first-class park on the property we already own with some of this revenue. The benefits to the public school district, obviously, is funding protection. When they, through a TIF process, they get pilot payments as opposed to through general tax revenue streams, that funding isn't included in the calculation of wealth of the state aid formula. And we know now, based on what's happening in Columbus, school districts are being cut out based on what they're doing in Columbus right now. And this will help protect both Finneytown and Winton Woods, those are the two districts that these projects are in, from having their funding reduced. The net TIF revenue payments, as I also indicated earlier, will help especially Finneytown with their capital project, and they're building out their 7 through 12 campus, which again will make them competitive in terms of new buildings and having people want to raise a family and move to Finneytown. So I know that was a lot. It was quick. I was told that I have about 10 minutes. So I wanted to leave time for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I will open it up to my colleagues for any questions, but I was looking at, I'm going to make one comment first, the first page on the housing stock rotation issues, and it had traditional family homes, 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath for $421,000. Was that before or after the assessment that was done by the state?
That was that particular property sold at that price in 2024.
In 2024, an assessment. So after the assessment, what was the worth? Would you have any idea?
Based on an assessment, probably at least 20% more, I would assume.
I would imagine. My other question is, I know you haven't looked at, have you looked at developers if this goes through?
No, we have the developers already on board.
Okay, and the developers are?
Drees.
Okay.
Drees being one and Ryan Homes being another.
Okay. And you are familiar with the county's stance on diversity, inclusion, and not just for subcontractors, but in development of these properties.
No, I understand, and and if the township actually owned the property, I think we'd be in a better driver's seat to control some of that. But since we don't own the properties, the individuals have already sold those properties to those potential developers.
Okay, because one of them has a better history of inclusion, and so we certainly want to.
Agreed. And I think with the public projects that we will be commencing with the walking trails as well as with the park, then we will make that a definitely a point.
Okay. And the other question I had was, are you wanting to do all three of them at the same time?
Yes, we're ambitious.
Okay. All righty. So I'll pass it on, Vice President Reese.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just following up, I'll start with that question, following up to Commission President Dumas on the intentionality. I understand you indicated that they have bought the homes or bought the property, but we're here today and we're going to have to make a vote if they want to get a break on the property. And looking at Springfield Township, it's certainly diversified with new leadership, electing 3 women, 3 Democratic women, and it's got to be, a change. I always say when the people vote, it can't be, oh, okay, we voted for y'all, the election's over, now let's get back to how we always was doing it before y'all got here, because the people have said they want something different. So I do think that we have some control, because I wouldn't want to vote on a tax break for someone who's collecting taxes from diverse, because we collect taxes from diverse people, and so we've got to have, we can't have taxation without participation. We just celebrated Dr. King. It was more than a speech. As one of the speakers said, we got to get to the real Dr. King that was not that popular. And one of the things he was on contract compliance, so that, diverse people could get contracts with the government. So while we don't control necessarily the property, you're here at Springfield Township today asking for TIF districts, which is a tax break. And I just want to make sure, what can we do? Because a lot of times if we don't talk to the developers, they won't do it.
Yeah.
I remember one developer never had diversity. And then when we did the Reds in Bond Hill, all of a sudden they said, we want diversity. They found everybody.
Yeah.
And then they did MLK and they said they couldn't find anybody because no one put the question before them.
Right.
So what can we do before I vote on something like
Yeah.
this to make sure that we'll have it at all levels?
Oh, for sure.
Real estate agents, to people moving in the neighborhood, to ownership, to jobs. How can we assure that?
Well, first, let me, address something you mentioned. We are not offering a tax abatement. Individuals moving into these homes will be paying full property tax. There is no tax abatement. It's simply the tax is being deferred to the TIF revenue fund to be utilized for these purposes. To answer your question more
Yeah,
directly,
but let me say that I understand that, But normally, these would be taxes that would be collected that we can use all over the county, and it would be for just your component. And I'm saying you, as Springfield Township, I want to make sure that, I think the question that was raised by President Dumas is a very important one.
No, for sure. And
Because we do have some, I guess, some things that have happened, and there's been not a track record. So what I'm saying is everything we do is just like you're leveraging. We want to leverage. If I have to vote now, if you're saying I ain't got to vote on it, and you can go and do it, and you don't need our votes, then that's different. But you asking for us to vote on something, and I'm just saying, how can we? Do you have something in place? And you might have something in place, and I just wanted to give you opportunity to express that.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, if it was the case where I didn't need your vote, I wouldn't be here. So I do want to be here and ask this and work, in conjunction with the county. Absolutely. As far as your question, yes, we can and do request that we get a diversified set of bidders on our public projects. Any revenue that's going to be used from the TIF for whether it be infrastructure improvements or anything else will be publicly bid. The township will control that bid process. So with those particular aspects of the project, yes, we can request and encourage a diversified set of bidders as well as contractors. And obviously, from a participatory standpoint, the township is very diverse. And in the neighborhoods that surround this already, that adjoin it, they are a diverse neighborhood. So we do expect that a diverse set of home buyers will be looking at these areas. And so we're very encouraged by that, and which is one of the reasons we're actually pushing ahead with it so forcefully, is that we want to get these in place so that we can bring in new residents. Not just one certain type, but all types of residents. And so, yes, I can commit to you that with the bidding project that's going to be using public funds, we will actually, request diverse bidders. And if there's any guidance that you can assist us with that to make that even more successful, we would welcome that.
Great. And I would maybe recommend connecting with Robert Bell, who because we've worked with the prosecutor's office and have a pretty solid proposal together. So maybe working with in concert with him with the bold list. He's had some successes. I would recommend that. The other piece that I wanted to ask is, what's the timeline on this again?
So, that's a good question. The market's really going to dictate that. But I think if you talk to the builders, they're hoping to be built out within 3 to 5 years. And that once they start, obviously we know that, carrying costs become expensive. So they want to get it done as fast as possible. They're incentivized to do that. And obviously we want to encourage that too. So 3 to 5 years is what we're being told. And again, but the market's going to dictate that.
Gotcha. And then you talked about the diversification of housing, which I think is great. Is there some ranch style? I'm noticing.
Yeah.
That's very important in Hamilton County.
Absolutely.
We need more ranch because people, can't get up and down those stairs.
And that one community is purely ranch, landominium, and then it's full HOA maintained. So there's no cutting grass, there's no shoveling snow, there's nothing. So
great. I know people are excited about that.
I am. I'm an empty nester now. I'm ready.
How long before the public parts could take place? In other words, if we move forward with this and they get going, do you get ready to go on the public components that you all would be in charge of, or does that take some more time?
Commissioner, we already have.
Okay.
So those processes are all but complete, except for one of the developments. And what we do in the township was somewhat, I'm not going to say it's unique, I'm sure others do it, but we take it very seriously to engage the community. We actually require, even if the developer doesn't want to participate, we do it anyway, where we do an open house prior to a formal application being made. And so we bring in the entire community and let them know what's being proposed before it's actually proposed, so that any concerns they have can be incorporated in the development if possible, right? We can't make everyone happy. Sometimes you say being in zoning is like being a basketball referee. Every time you blow your whistle, one side's mad at you. But that we do try and encourage that, and we get them involved. And we've done that on several occasions with these developments in particular, I think more than 2 to 3 times on each one of them. And so we already have that feedback, and that feedback's already been incorporated into the proposed plans that you see here today.
Oh, great. Then my last question is on affordability. and there's different levels of
Oh,
affordability.
it's relative, right? Yeah.
But one of the things I think was a good question, looking at, what's the value of the homes, because we want to make sure we're not pricing people out of Hamilton County.
Yeah.
And so when we look at that, a working family, because that's one thing I love about Springfield Township, you got working families there, and they're able to afford to live there. Would these be on the spectrum? I mean, cover the
I believe they will, and I think the important aspect for the TIF, and I think that's a great point that you just made, is that the TIF actually enables that more than you think. Because if the TIF revenue wasn't able to help with the infrastructure cost to some level, then that cost would be passed on to the home buyer, would make the homes even more expensive. So by doing this, we're actually making the homes more affordable. And we know now, I just showed you that a 3-bedroom, 1-bath is $205,000 just last year. What we consider affordable, at least when I bought my house, isn't the same thing anymore. So we have to keep that in mind. But yes, I think these will be in the more affordable range, and will allow for a great diversity of new residents moving into the township, and then obviously subsequently the county.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Driehaus.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you to the team for being here and the newly elected trustee. It's good to see you. So I feel like these are very exciting projects. We are all committed to providing more housing in Hamilton County. And so this gets to that goal, especially when we talk about affordable housing. So I applaud you for the work that's being done here. I wanted to dig in just a little bit on what the TIF will pay for. You said you've done some public sessions with the community to understand what their desires are related to these projects. And so because we're voting on the TIF part of this, wondering if you could expand a little bit. You talked a little bit about a walking trail. What other types of infrastructure will the TIF help pay for to make these more affordable, but also more responsive to the needs of the community?
So in 2 of the developments, the MSD is requiring additional storm sewer to be included in the project. It isn't necessarily required for this neighborhood, meaning it's required in terms of MSD's requiring it, but it isn't necessary for this neighborhood. But they're requiring the developer to put that in so that existing residents can now tap into the public sewer system at a cost less than what they would be charged if they had to run that main themselves, if that makes sense. Additionally, we'll be offsetting some infrastructure costs in terms of some of the curb and gutter and roads in one of the developments, again, to make the houses more affordable. Otherwise, that cost associated with that infrastructure would be passed on to the people buying that house. So those are ways that we'll be utilizing the TIF revenue to effectuate a lower cost for those particular homes and those subdivisions, in addition to the more public capital projects that I mentioned with the walking trail and the park and things like that, as well as the school utilizing it for some of their needs.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you touched on stormwater and runoff, because we hear quite a bit about how the new developments are exacerbating the problem of stormwater going into the sewer system, and then we all are paying to treat this water that's running off. So I'm glad that MSD has weighed in and that you're going to try to ameliorate that kind of runoff and make it more affordable for the homeowners. So I applaud you for that as well.
Yeah, that's part of the green space requirement as well. We want more green space on the development to absorb that stormwater.
Yeah.
But when we take away their developable property, that increases the construction costs as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I don't really have any other questions. I'm looking forward to seeing these.
No, I appreciate it.
I'm glad you got the developers in place, and I concur with this idea that while those are private funds going to develop the actual homes, the public piece of this, we have a keen interest in diversity and making sure those dollars are spent wisely. Yes. And so it sounds like we're on the same page there. So
absolutely.
Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and it's obvious that you guys have done lots of work on these projects. The next step for us would be on Thursday, possibly, to...
Well, so if the board's desire is to not object on this, there's actually no resolution that's necessary. The only resolution that would actually be necessary is if there was a formal objection.
Okay.
So, for instance, on past projects where we have not objected, I mean, you could technically pass a resolution to say we choose not to object. But if there is no objection, there's actually nothing that's necessary. The criticality of the timeline here was that if there is an objection, it has to be filed within 30 days of the township submitting this, which was back on December 30th, I believe. And I do want to thank the township for their flexibility on this. I knew they were trying to get moving on this project. They were ready to submit earlier in December. We had some budget challenges that were going on. We talked with the township, and they held off on submitting this so that it would make sure that it would fit within the county's meeting schedule.
Okay. And I had some questions, and they've been answered for me, so I want to make sure there are no objections.
And I will say that we will get with Chris and Kathleen, and we will make sure that they get hooked up with Robert Bell in our office there to make sure that as there are projects that can utilize some of the benefits of Robert's inclusion processes, et cetera, that we make sure that that's integrated in this as well.
Okay. Were you getting with
Yeah, I just had one thing. And I know during the budget process, we couple $100,000 for the facade program there in Springfield Township that we did vote on. So we didn't forget about Springfield Township during the budget process. But just to kind of see, I always like this map in terms of the county, but just to see how all these connect our investments, both cash investments, incentivized investments, so we can kind of get a map of kind of what is happening. Because I know we've been able to partner with Springfield Township on some different things, and it'd be helpful for us to see like this map of change and investment, so that we could kind of understand it. And then, Mr. Ludo, if you could make sure that Mr. Robert Bell is connected with them, because we're looking at this thing like in a holistic approach versus a piecemeal approach, and so I'm excited about this and excited about the other things that we're doing and just kind of seeing how that's all coming.
Yeah, and I think obviously we'll work with Jeff and his team on that and get that information to you, because there has been a lot of good work in partnership with the county over the last few years, and it's moving the needle in the township, and we do appreciate it. And I'm glad you used the word investment, because a lot of elected officials don't use that, and that's my mindset as well. These things aren't expenses. They're not costs. They are in some level, but they're investments into the future of our community, and a lot of elected officials don't think that way, so I applaud you in using that word, because words matter, and that's important. And looking at these things as investments is something that I think governments have to do in the future rather than just expenditures.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the other word you want to hear is no objections.
I would like to hear both of those words in conjunction with each other, absolutely.
Very good. So green light sounds
Right.
like.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
All righty. We're going to move on to our second item, Children's Services Levy update. John Nelson, Interim Director of Job and Family Services. You're not John Nelson.
We're tag teaming
Okay.
this presentation today.
And if you can introduce anyone who's here from JFS, that would be great.
And commissioners, if I could, just real quick, if you want to have them introduced first.
Yeah, and then I was gonna-
go right ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner, good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to continue the conversation on Children's Services Levy. This is an important subject, so really appreciate the time of the commissioner. Thank you, Madam President. Want to introduce JFS team here with us. So we've got Laura Wolf, who is usually our voice in the sky when it comes to JFS related issues. So it's happy to have her in person. We have Jen Ketter, our comptroller, and we've got Alex Patsfall, who is our Deputy Director of Children's Services here as well. And so we also have one of our interns join us as well to observe the process. And also want to acknowledge the many partners of JFS who we work with that are here. The YWCA is here, Talbot House is here. So truly appreciate the partnership that we have with our providers as well. So
Great.
thank you.
And I think Jeff is going to kick it off before.
And I'll just thank you, Commissioner, just be very, very quick on this. But I did just want to set a little bit of context here because of the uniquely critical nature of this particular discussion. So we've obviously deal with weighty issues all the time. The issue that the board just dealt with is a weighty issue relating to housing development in the county, but we have dealt with over the past year our share of very weighty issues. But perhaps maybe like no other issue that we've dealt with in recent years, the issue we are about to discuss, and that is the status and the next steps for the Children's Services Levy, substantially impacts both how we care for one of the community's most vulnerable populations and the general finances of the county. As the board is aware, the Children's Services Levy is slated to be considered on the ballot this year. And for the first time I can recall, we are actually bringing an issue to you really outside of the time frame that's typically prescribed by the Tax Levy Review Committee. So Lisa and John are going to go into a deep dive into the rationale for that. And as they do, you're going to hear and see a lot of information. But in summary, primarily, this is for those who are watching at home who are trying to understand this issue. The Children's Services Levy is the frontline defense for children at risk of abuse and neglect in Hamilton County. Simply put, it delivers critical services that protect children while helping families regain stability after being in crisis. And as we'll see here shortly, and as we'll hear, the needs of those children, primarily the most vulnerable among them, have begun to outpace the levy resources allocated for these purposes. So we wanted to bring this matter to the board as quickly as possible. Not only is this one of the most critical things we do as a county, but it's also a service that the state mandates we perform. So we wanted to provide the board with as much time to consider options and alternatives as possible. So with that, Commissioner, with your deference, I'll defer to Assistant Administrator Webb, who I think is going to tee this up, and then tag team the rest of the presentation with Mr. Nelson.
Very good. We'll get
Commissioners,
started.
I also have a couple introductions before we go ahead and get started. We're going to get started, if we can do the slides, Christy. We're going to get started talking about the Tax Levy Review Committee, but I want to make sure I note that we do have 2 members of the TLRC in the room with us right now, which is pretty impressive given there are currently 7 members with 2 vacancies, but both are on the Children's Services Subcommittee, and that is the TLRC Chair and Children's Services Review Chair, Gwen McFarland, right over here. And on the other side, I have Rabbi Robert Barr as well, one of our newest members to the TLRC. I will also note, thank you, Bridget, all of the children and families you see on these slides going forward have been touched by Children's Services in Hamilton County specifically. The Tax Levy Review Committee, the committee's policy is to create a balance between the needs of funding for various levy agencies on the one hand and the tax burden of the home and business owners on the other in Hamilton County. The TLRC is a 9-member volunteer board fully appointed by the commissioners to assist and advise on 4 key areas: whether a levy should appear on the ballot, the appropriate level of revenue to be generated by taxation, the appropriate duration of each levy, and the terms and conditions for levy contracts. This is achieved through the levy process, including hiring consultants, presentations, in-person tours of levy agencies and services in the community, public hearings, meetings of both subcommittees and the full committee, and I will add at times the commissioners' meetings as well, over a 7-month period each year that levies are under review. In addition, the TLRC also conducts midpoint reviews of each levy during each 5-year levy period, spending countless hours reviewing each of the levies under its charge. And it's key to me because these are volunteers. They spend hundreds of hours looking at each of these levies for us. The TLRC, though, serves as advisors to the commissioners on levy requests and recommendations, but the key here is the commissioners are the taxing authority. The commissioners are responsible for final determinations of all levy issues, including sizing and program funding levels as well. The Children's Services Levy, and this is specific from the ballot language, provides support for children's services and the care and placement of children. The levy was last approved by voters in November of 2021 at 4.51 mils and currently costs taxpayers $81.15 per $100,000 home. The levy was last increased in 2018. Prior to that, it had not been increased since 1996. The levy provides local funding for mandated services supporting children in our community. You've seen parts of these slides before, but I'm just going to roll through them again. In 2021, the Tax Levy Committee made 6 specific recommendations to the commissioners and then by default to the Job and Family Services in implementation of that levy cycle. Key in that levy cycle were aspirational goals and expectations of achievement for JFS, including expanded efforts to increase and retain staff, increasing diversity of staff and leadership, increasing services and support for older youth, development of a plan to support family homelessness, development of a plan for prevention efforts in our community, and increasing community-based programming, expansion of community health, and educational support for children. The JFS team and Children's Services began implementing all of those in early 2022. In 2025, the Tax Levy Committee was back before you past spring, presenting a midpoint report to the commissioners. In those findings, they had found that JFS had implemented those recommendations, but that current projections were beginning to show a deficit towards the end of the levy cycle. As a part of the recommendations in 2025, the TLRC included a recommendation to begin the full levy review in 2025 sooner. We actually started that review in July of last year for 2026 ballot consideration, and continued monitoring of levy fund balances. The TLRC has been at work. They've appointed a consultant, and they are currently in the review phase and data collection of the levy. This is, as Administrator Aludo noted, this is not something we typically bring to you at this stage, but in the 17 years that I've overseen the levies, that has not happened, but we've not seen what we are seeing with this levy currently. The TLRC is still in the data collection phase of the review, but concerns are being raised that the scope of this levy may actually be outside of their charge. The TLRC is finding that this is not routine levy maintenance they are reviewing, but it is sustainability, safety, and timing that they're looking at in terms of this levy. The TLRC began work earlier, as I just noted. As that work has progressed, it's been clear the challenge of this levy is urgent and more structural than anticipated. We wanted to bring, the TLRC and the administration wanted to bring this to the board as early as possible to protect the needs of children and the county's long-term stability. So what does this mean? I have for you levy plans. I'm going to click through these. They are in the slides for the public to be able to view within, but the key here is if you look at the green columns here, this is the levy planned expenditures for the current period, that's 2022 through 2026. As you see the levy plan, the first 2 years of the cycle, 22 and 23, JFS was in line and actually slightly under budget from the levy plan as they began implementing those recommendations with a stable path for the levy. What we saw happening in 24 and 25, though, are these cost increases here in the purple columns noted well above the levy plan amounts. Why? What could be causing this? If you look at these out-of-home care costs that the levy has had for children and families, they've just been increasing rapidly. And on that, I will turn it over to John.
Thank you, Assistant Administrator. Just want to quickly now talk about what does this mean? You know, what does this mean in terms of what is out-of-home care? What is the work that the staff do as part of Children's Services? So I just want to kind of give an overview of the exact work that JFS does with the Children's Services levy and why this work is so important. So 79% of the work that JFS does, which is funded by the Children's Services Fund, is mandated work. In essence, we don't have a choice. This is mandated at the federal and the state level, and the county needs to implement this. The county cannot opt out. We receive about almost 50,000 calls each year on our 24/7 abuse and neglect hotline, the 241 Kids line. We get investigation safety assessments, over 12,000 reports, over 5,000 reports that are screened in, result in open children's services cases. Volume is huge. We've got our family preservation and reunification services. We've got foster, kinship, and other placements. I'll go over those placement numbers just in a moment and what those mean. We have clinical and wraparound services through emancipation as well. So this means that even when the kids leave us, or if they're in a stable setting, they still need mental health services. We still provide those mental health services. Who does the Children's Services levy serve? We serve over 6,000 families, 13,000 children in just the last year. 3,000 of those children were in custody in 2025. 1,000 just entered custody in 2025. 2,300 of those children are in are in JFS custody at any given point in time. Nearly 27% are under the age of 3, which is, of course, presents a huge challenge because the needs of a 3-year-old is vastly different from somebody who is 10 or 12. And then, of course, we've got 19% that are over 16 and above, which, of course, presents a different challenge as well. So a lot of nuance in just the numbers itself. And then 81% of the cases involve substance abuse, mental health, or domestic violence. So very, very challenging issues that the caseworkers work with every day. Assistant Administrator Webb just referred to the pictures that we shared today, and that was the pictures of our parents who have adopted children from JFS custody. These are all pictures from JFS Adoption Day. Always a joy to see the smiling faces when kids know that they have a safe home to be with and parents that are happy to have children in their lives. But the journey doesn't start with these smiles. The journey starts with a lot of difficulty. And today I want to talk about one particular child. Of course, we're not going to use her real name, but we're going to talk about Ruby. And as we've started this levy conversation, there's been a lot of conversation around numbers. We've talked a lot of dollars and cents. We've talked a lot of percentages. And we've talked in terms of children in care. But who are these children in care? And before I went ahead and kind of started talking more numbers, I just wanted to draw attention to one child in our care and just the challenges that Ruby had to face in a very young age. And these are just examples. Ruby is just one example. And Ruby's situation is not the worst. There are children who have worse experiences than Ruby. Ruby lived in a very, very dirty home and had been exposed to domestic violence, had been exposed to drug use. Ruby and her sister were molested in her house. And Ruby had to be moved to grandma's house. And then from grandma's house, Ruby was moved to dad's house. Dad couldn't keep custody of Ruby. And then Ruby ended up with JFS, in JFS custody. In the time that Ruby was in JFS custody, she had to be moved to 5 different placement locations because Ruby had so many mental health challenges because of the experiences that she had from her home, all the exposure to violence. Ruby had to cycle through an emergency shelter, 2 group homes, 1 residential care facility, 1 psychiatric residential treatment facility. Every place that she went, different challenges: poor impulse control, repeated self-harm and suicidal ideation, almost requiring for one-on-one supervision, where somebody had to watch Ruby so that she doesn't hurt herself or hurt somebody else. It's hard. It's a really hard challenge to be able to take care of kids like Ruby. And so as we're talking about some of these costs and expenses, I just want to remind people who are watching from home that there are kids like Ruby in our community who could be the future leaders of this country. And what we do is for kids like Ruby, all the struggles that our caseworkers go through is to make sure kids like Ruby are successful. So in Ruby's case, to be able to take care of Ruby, it cost JFS in this county $178,000 in 1 year. In 1 year. And that is a challenge because of the mental health, physical health, and the placement costs of children like Ruby. So as we talk about Ruby, and every number that you see here has thousands in front of it, and that's part of thousands of cases like Ruby's. So as you can see, in 2021, we had 2,603 children in custody. In 2025, that creeped up to 3,000. And the children are placed in several different kinds of settings. which our best preference is foster and kinship home, as these are the most family-like settings. So as you can see, JFS really strives to get the kids to a family setting as soon as possible and whenever possible. So 45% of the children in JFS custody are in foster homes. 36% of them are in kinship homes. 9%, and these are kids, older youth, so 16 plus, mostly 18 to 21, are in independent living settings. 5% and 4% are in group homes and residential care, respectively. And then there's 1% there that are in different locations. And you can see the approximate cost of each of these levels of care. And these are very expensive processes that they have to go through, very challenging services that they receive that come with a huge price tag, but it is very much needed for the mental health and the physical health and making sure that these children are successful when they emancipate from JFS custody. Here's another way of looking at some of that placement data. Just again, the same different levels of placement, just broken down in a pie chart. As you can see, we really aim for that foster care and that kinship because that is the best situation for our children. So this is, again, a very important portion of what JFS does, and I think this is why we wanted to put the pictures of the children on adoption day, because one of the biggest victories for JFS is when we are able to move children into permanency. And you can see that 46% of the children that come into JFS custody eventually end up with a guardian or a parent, which is wonderful news. They're back with family. And 27% are placed with relatives or non-removable parents. And then 16.5% of them are adopted. And about 8% of them reach adulthood, and we give them the supports that they need to be able to be successful adults. And then other reasons, miscellaneous reasons, are classified there in 1%. But nearly 9 in 10 children who left our care in 2025 achieved permanency, which is a huge number. I want to take a moment here to talk about the people who do the work of JFS, the critical work of JFS, our caseworkers. So when we started this levy in 2021, you can see that purple bar graph there, and that shows that the turnover levels. So we had 100 staff members turning over, and we were only recruiting annually at about 45 staff members. As we reach 2025, you'll see that those numbers are changed. The purple graphs, the turnover has gone down, the recruitment has gone up. And the Children's Services Levy has allowed us to do that. That was one of the goals that the TLRC had given us, and we were able to deliver on that. And over time, we've also really looked at our caseload for our caseworkers, and this is in benefit for the children that are in the caseload. We've been able to really reduce those caseloads as well. How were we able to reduce the caseload? We really concentrated on recruitment, expanded digital and social media outreach. We added dedicated staff to support hiring, really hiring experience, streamlined the hiring process, made it quick so that they'll be able to get from an interview to getting to the position and getting trained for the position quickly. And then providing retention supports. This is everything from, providing them mentorship, making sure that they are trauma informed through training, professional development, open communication, and then most importantly is wage adjustments to be able to match them up to peer agencies as well. At this time, I'm going to turn it over again to Assistant Administrator Webb to kind of continue talking about some of the placement expenses and placement challenges that we've faced as well.
This is where the real tag team comes in. Placement costs are by far the largest levy expense. If you look at this is 2025 actual expenses. That top bar there is placement costs at $91 million. followed significantly lower with administrative costs and payroll at 31, and then almost all single-digit numbers from there forward in terms of the costs to the levy. What does this mean to the levy? While the average number of kids in care increased 19% from 2021 to 2025, the out-of-home care costs for these kids increased 92% in the same time frame. So what you see here is the green is the prior levy projections. As you see again, those first 2 years, JFS was actually below the predictions for costs for out-of-home care, and then those numbers coming forward in 2024 and 2025, which actuals are 79 million and almost 93 million respectively. What causes these rising placement costs? I will turn it over to Interim Director Nelson.
Thank you. So there's basically three big factors that we're looking at in terms of rising placement costs. One is the increased complexity of cases. We just talked about Ruby. Ruby is a perfect example. Just the amount of mental health needs that Ruby had, all of the abuse and trauma that she had faced. Just being able to provide children like Ruby with the support comes with a price tag, and that is the complex cases. Mental health needs, developmental disabilities, and then the next part is the Family First Prevention Services Act. This is federal law that was passed in 2018. I have a slide on that, just giving a little bit more detail as well. But as part of that, there were several changes that happened in our funding model at the federal level, which included changes in how we were able to draw down funding from federal sources, but also, most importantly, the requirements, which were good requirements, which were basically licensing for our facilities that we were placing kids. But the licensing requirement, of course, was an additional cost burden for the placement agencies, and that was a cost that was eventually passed down for the counties to bear as well. So there are definitely some changes legislatively, and the TLRC recognized that in their 2021 plan for JFS as well. And the last driver for cost and raising placement costs is specialized and congregate care. Kids with high needs often end up in very expensive residential centers or group homes, especially children that might have mental health challenges, suicidal ideation. The cost, because of the one-on-one services that they need, the cost really does go up significantly over time.
These placement costs have outpaced inflation significantly. Foster home costs are up 29%, group homes 64%, residential treatment facilities 54%. Of note, these are state of Ohio rates, not just Hamilton County. It's happening everywhere. These are news articles just from the current 12-month period from the Ohio State House, Claremont County reporting on raising placement costs, outpacing levy revenues, Toledo Blade, Lucas County, talking about the growing number of children with high behavioral and mental health needs, dramatically increasing the costs of their care and their county as well. If we look at the statewide per diem rates, that dark columns there are statewide, the bottom is Hamilton County. You'll see our rates are increasing pretty well on parallel with them. It is a statewide issue, not just Hamilton County experiencing these issues. Now, what's next, and what does this mean for the levy? The consultants, as I stated earlier, are still in the data collection phase with the TLRC for their reporting. We have a final report from the consultants due in mid-February, but what we're seeing right now from initial drafts and conversations with the consultants as they refine their data information and get it to us are large needs in the community and large needs for additional support for the levy going forward. Standard in this phase of the review, when we've done this with several levies, is to ask the consultants to mock up a few scenarios for what the future of the levy looks like. The first scenario that we had them look at is what the cost would be to maintain current services that the levy provides to the community. What we saw when we did that scenario was an increased need from the current levy revenue of just over $81.6 million a year, a need for additional revenue in the amount of $123.4 million a year. That's on top of the current levy. The committee and the TLRC, one, started to have conversations to bring us to this point here related to that information, but we also worked with consultants to say we didn't feel that that number did a good job of balancing, as we get back to that first slide, the needs of the community with the taxpayers. The committee asked them to run a secondary scenario with reduced service levels to see where that would get into. That got to the $74 million of additional need level. In conversations with JFS as well, in working with the consultants, we're also developing right now a third level that is slightly lower than that, even to try to figure out where we can get to with this levy and ongoing support. That is at about $65 million right now of additional levy revenue need. You see why this brought the conversation to the commissioners for next steps on that. On that note, and for conversation with the commissioners, I also bring forward the targeted dates for 2026. The levy funding goes through 2026 right now. There are 2 ballot options available, both the May 5th and the November 3rd ballot to look for consideration as we look at millage amounts, timing, and the levy going forward. With that, I will check in with Interim Director Nelson for anything additional and then turn it over to the commissioners for questions.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to talk through some of these scenarios and also just the challenges that we're facing as well.
Thank you so much for all of this information that, of course, we need to digest and have questions about. So I will open it up for Vice President Reese.
I have one question before we get to this point, because I know there's some people watching. We had a recommendation for right now. We got 2 issues. We've got right now where we put some funding to get us through the gap right now. And there was a presentation to us about some potential cuts. I'd like to start there because I know there's people watching, and then if you don't mind, Commissioner President, then I can come back to me later with the questions I have about the levy. Is that okay? Or
Okay, so if they're watching, they'll probably continue to watch, I'm thinking.
Okay.
And if you had any questions, for the people that are watching, that may have questions for them. Did you have any questions for them? Or?
I got a lot of questions. That's why I didn't want to, because I wanted to make sure those people know that, I mean, there were some adjustments, and we said we were going to come back to this meeting to tell us what those were, but we didn't. I thought that's what we were going to start with, but we never did, so I didn't know how we want to handle that.
Well, we want to make it clear, too, that we have not confirmed any cuts or anything yet.
Yeah.
There were some adjustments that were being made from our comments that we had made the last meeting. So we can, how would you like to do that?
If I could provide just a little
Sure.
bit of context, Commissioner. So, and on to Commissioner Reese's question, so I did provide the board over the past 24 hours probably with a report that came from Job and Family Services with some alternatives based upon last Tuesday's session. So that's something I wanted to talk with the board about individually with each office before we bring it back to a public meeting. But JFS has in fact gone back and based upon the conversation that happened last Tuesday, looked at some other options. So that is out there. We wanted to talk about it individually with offices before we brought it forward publicly, just to make sure we were on the right path here. But we are getting close to that, yes.
Okay. That's what I got confused about, because when I saw that, and we had said last time that there'll be a meeting. So, okay, that's fine. You'll bring that back at a later time. Okay, to the levy. I have some concerns about, I think we all care about children and we have a responsibility and those kind of things. But I think that as we go into this, I guess my question is, how do you stop the bleed? If you're bleeding out already, and I will say in 2024, December, the meeting, it's on tape, I asked the question, how much money do we have in the bank? And we had $100 million. And I said, well, good, maybe we can do something to give back to the taxpayers who are struggling, because only people that have the, the homeowners have to do that. And then all of a sudden, almost 12 months or less, we're back and we're bankrupt. And to the taxpayer that's watching out there, they're saying you're bankrupt just in time to go to the ballot. And just in time, when I just got a letter in the mail, people getting letters in the mail right now that their property taxes are due and they don't get a break. It's, either you do it or you lose your house. So there's no break on this side, but now we're over here. And I know they said rising costs, but costs are going to continue to rise. So where do you stop the bleed? If you go to the ballot and you ask for more money, is it going to stop the bleed? Because we combined two levies that was supposed to stop the bleed, and it never did. It's just a river that's running. So what would be the answer to the taxpayer that's watching?
Yeah, Commissioner, I think there's a few external things that are happening, and then there's a few internal things that I think we are doing as well. So the first things first, I'll tell you, one of the most innovative things that we've done at the county has helped. I think concentrating on kinship has been a really good thing, and we're leaders at the state level on kinship. Kinship as a placement option, along with foster care, is one of the lowest. And so, recruiting those kin families and foster families, I think going forward, I'm sure the TLRC is looking at this already. I feel like the next levy cycle's focus is very much going to be on looking and recruiting families so that we can foster and we can offer kin support to children in care, which is going to address some of the cost levels, but most importantly, help the children out and provide them the right setting, the most family-like setting for them to be in JFS custody. The second internal thing, Commissioner, that I want to talk about is some of the prevention services that this commission has directed us. Some really great programs like the Youth Employment Program, which provides stability to families so that even before they can enter the system, they've got support at home, income at home, so that they can be stable. Domestic violence training, ability to stabilize homes even before they have contact with JFS. So that's a great way to stop the bleeding. So those are just a couple of the internal things that we're doing, I think, as a county to really stop that bleeding. Externally, we as JFS are having conversations at the state level, because this is just not an isolated Hamilton County problem. This is a state problem. And so we're having conversations with the Association for Children's Services. We're having conversations with the state and saying, we need to do something to stop this bleeding at a state level, because oftentimes what we're doing is we're competing for beds with our other counties. We're competing for beds with Franklin County. We're competing for beds with Cuyahoga County. And we don't want to do that. They're our peers. They're in the same place that we are. And so some of the advocacy that we are doing in terms of JFS, Hamilton County JFS, is going to the state and saying things need to change. We need to have a statewide framework on how we are going to negotiate some of these costs and manage some of these costs as well. So just off the top of my head, there's many proposals that we are looking at, Commissioner, that is going to address this, but just at a really high level, those are three things that I think that we can do to stop the bleeding and help while still keeping the kids safe and protected and giving them the services that they need.
Thank you. We say we're hiring a consultant, and it was brought up at our, I think, last meeting that the consultant was way off. I mean, it's $100 million off. That's a big deal. I mean, $100 million is a lot of money to go in 12 months or less. And now we're going back to a consultant. It's kind of like the weatherman. You came out and said it was going to be sunny skies, and we woke up to snow. People begin to say, they got the money, but they didn't give an accurate accounting. And I just wanted to say that as it relates to consultants, I would ask Mr. Ludo, I'd like to see a consultant to look at the whole economic climate of the taxpayers. I want to look at all the taxes. The city is proposing an income tax. That's going to take more money out your check. All these at the same time. How does that make us affordable or unaffordable? While you looking through there, could you look through it on the other, because I'm still talking. When you answer, you can put your slide up. So that's what I'm looking at. We need a consultant to look at not just the taxes that we got going, but all of it to see how do we make sure that Hamilton County is affordable. I want to highlight, so that's what I'd like to see a consultant be, not just for one levy. Can it pass? Will the people go for it? I got people running up to me, oh, they're going to always vote for this. Well, let me tell you what the climate is now. Claremont County, November 2025, a renewal with an increase narrowly failed, raising concerns about the future of services despite past success and passing similar levies. The climate is different out here. Got the city saying they want to raise income tax. You got over here, now we got a bunch of stuff. And then the property taxes jumped through the roof. Adams County, November 2025, a new levy also failed in the same election cycle, showing inconsistent voter support. So most people who normally supports us are saying, I'd like to support you, but I got to take care of my family first. I can't be outside. Also, they said a lot of them did pass, but there's some others that didn't, illustrating localized challenges. Then they say, why did they fail? Voter resistance to tax increases. Even for vital services, residents struggle with the rising property taxes, as noted by parents. That was one of the reasons. Economic inflation and cost of living. Inflation is still here. Voter resistance to tax increases, even like they said, for vital services. So they got economic pressures and those kind of things. They said these local funding issues are a part of a larger trend of financial challenges for Ohio schools and children's service levies, often exacerbated by state budget decisions and funding models. What we saw with the state, it came out, we got some bills, and your bills ain't doing nothing to cut property taxes. It was presented to us last week. The big statement to this, none of this cuts property taxes. So all the bills, and they running with these bills, are not helping you cut your bills. Not today. And so we have all that climate, and I'm just trying to put the climate out there. I mean, at the end you say, hey, is it November or is it May? Or I think it's a bigger question than that. I think the consultants need to look at not just this levy, not just, hey, would you go? And I also found that in polling, because we've seen some elections come out different than the polls. Because they up in the polls. And then election day, everybody looking and crying. How did this happen? And the guy said he lies to the pollsters, told me. He don't tell the truth because he don't feel anybody should know how he's voting. So we can't just go on polls. We just can't go on consultants. The consultant said we're going to have $20 million left over. We in the hole done spent $100 million and we're bankrupt in the fund. So I just think in terms of the climate, in terms of inflation, in terms of property taxes that jumped through the roof, ain't nobody done nothing about it. The bills are due, the letters are out. We've got to figure out possibly, and I said this to Mr. Ludo as he meets with each of us, I said we've got to put a thinking cap on and look at how do we look at stuff differently. Because I think Adams lost it, because if you lose, then you put your thinking cap on. Oh man, I think we can do it this way. To put the thinking cap on now and see, are there other ways? Are there other funds? We find funds all the time when we're building stuff. They call and we need $800 million, we figure it out. We were here, we found $50 million in 24 hours to pay for a case that I feel we shouldn't even pay for. With the Millennium Hotel, we had to pay Port Authority to pay their debt, the $50 million that we founded in 24 hours. So we've got to figure out how we had Sundance. We thought we were going to get it. We found the money quickly. We thought we were going to get the soccer league. We found the money quickly. So we just got to figure out another way. They'll say, oh, these are different pots and da-da-da-da. I tell them, look to borrow. This can be a 100-year loan. Look to see if the state will loan us some money. Look to see some other ways. Can we borrow? Do we have money over here? We're selling buildings. If any of that money can happen. We've got to now put on creative thinking caps where the only thing we say is, let's go back to the homeowner and put it on them. Because then if they reject it, just like in Adams, they figured out a creative way to make it happen. So I wanted to put that, and that's not necessarily just on you guys. It's on everybody. We've got to think differently. Years ago, we didn't have TikTok. We got TikTok now. We had MySpace. Now we in TikTok. We had Facebook. We got to think of some new ways because the rubber band is breaking. It's breaking. They can't afford to live in Hamilton County. It's breaking. So these are very important issues. Yes, if we don't do it, it's going to come out of our general fund and we'll have to do this and that. But we got to think differently because I'm telling you from what I'm hearing out here, people that I normally don't hear them talking like this, and we're seeing it. Claremont County, all these people who normally was with us, they ain't with us because they got to be with themselves. So I know the timing couldn't be worse. The narrative looks terrible. How in the world were the consultants $80 million off target? They were $80 million off target. They said, we'll have $20 million left over. We got nothing. $100 million we spent. How did they make an $80 million mistake? And that's where I'm coming from. Cost is always going up because inflation. So that means we can't stop the bleed. We could come with these nice programs, but costs keep going up. And that means even if we go to the ballot, costs gonna go up. We'll be back again talking about going up. At some point, we got to figure out how to stop the bleed. I don't have the answer to it, but I think, we've got to, I've said this to Mr. Ludo, we got to put our thinking caps on and try to think differently. Otherwise, we're going to be forced to think differently. So those are my comments that I have for it. I appreciate you telling us where we are. My last thing is, Mr. Ludo, if we start spending a whole lot of money and the bank account keeps being, we start getting toward $100 million of not having any money, I would hope, you came to us once, but I'm telling you, December 2024, it was reported in this chambers, you wasn't here, John, you weren't at the podium, that we had $100 million in the bank. And now we're 12 months later and we had to put some money to try to keep us afloat. So if we start seeing those type of bleeds, we gotta figure out something quick. Now we're talking about slowing down hiring and all that. We should have been started to look at that if we started to see the bleed going. And I understand it is a statewide problem. We'd hope the state can fix it. But unfortunately, I haven't seen much from the state. So those are the things that the questions that I have. I'm not ready to make a decision on May versus November. I'm trying to make a decision on how do we come up with a new way of doing things so that we're not in this predicament in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Driehaus.
So before I get started, I would like to provide an opportunity for John or Lisa or Jeff to respond to this idea, because I've heard it before about the level of the reserve a year or two ago and what has happened to the reserve. I think that is a question that needs to be answered.
I'll just start and turn it over to Lisa and John, who probably have more information. Just going back and looking at the information that I have that was provided by JFS recently was that back in 24, we were close to $100 million. The consultant actually did project an ending balance in 2026, at the end of 26, of right around $20 million. So the consultant's projections were different than where we find ourselves now, which is projecting, as the board knows from the presentation we had last week, finding ourselves looking at the potential for a negative balance. But what I would say is that the consultant's recommendations were based upon the implementation of all the preventative programming that was done, which, had that been the sole controlling factor, would have probably landed us right around their ending projection. What the consultant did not forecast or project, which is the same issue that we're seeing, was not projected around the state, and that is the dramatic increase in out-of-home care costs, which in 24 and 25 together, just about, and just doing the math off the top of my head right now, just about together is responsible for the vast majority of that delta between the 16 million negative that we're projecting and the 24 million that the consultant was projecting. I think one of the issues that came up last week regarding the consultant's projections, Commissioner Summer Dumas, I think you brought this up, was, well, why were we looking? And it's a good question. Why were we looking at continuing a drawdown? The trajectory was headed negative. What's the story there? And I think the story there was that negative trajectory was supposed to hit a soft landing, where we were implementing these preventative services, which could then be reined back as the balance stabilized. But what no one projected was the dramatic increase in out-of-home care costs, which is not a one-time thing, which is not something that can be easily reined in, which is something that is the cost of doing business for the most vulnerable kids in care. So that would just be a high-level comment in terms of the drawdown of the balance. The dollars went primarily to the preventative services as they were prescribed by the TLRC, and on top of that, to these increases in the cost of care, which drove the balance down even further than what was projected, because the consultant had projected an ending balance of around 24 million. And so I hope that explains some of the delta. Lisa, John, I don't know if that...
Absolutely right on with that. And you're correct too, Commissioner, that at the end of 2024, there was just over $100 million in the fund balance. But again, what wasn't foreseen is this dramatic out-of-home care cost. Christy, will you just flip over to where it was really quickly here? There we go. And we do have the levy planned actuals here showing that $24 million at the end versus now. And if you look at 2024 actuals, the $102 million fund balance, but then the increasing out-of-home care costs. This isn't actually the out-of-home. Hold on. Oh, here. Out-of-home care costs over time at these striking increases, when the consultants' predictions on these were more in line with 63, I believe it was 65, and then $69 million. And had those come to fruition, our discussion would be different right now. But that is not the case. And JFS is working with their team on seeing if there's anything that can be done to control those costs, but that is where we're at right now.
Yeah, and commissioners, if we just want to kind of quickly draw attention to this slide. So this is basically showing just what the consultant had predicted was going to be the expenditures year after year versus our actual expenditures. So, and this is why I think the alarm was sounded when it was sounded, because when you look at 22 and 23, the actual levy expenditure is actually slightly under what the consultant had projected. So, when we looked at it, said, okay, we're going to get that soft landing of that $25 million. But as we wrapped up year 2024, and that's when I think we started having some candid conversations with the TLRC about it, was when we started seeing that purple bar was now out exceeding that green bar, because it's primarily driven by the cost of care there. So yeah, it's by no means the ideal situation, but as soon as I think we became aware of it, I think we wanted to engage the TLRC and the commissioners as well on the situation, and just bring everyone up to speed. But that 100 million, Commissioner, was there. And, it is, I think, very hard for us to look at that and say, where did it go? But I think the answer is here, and that basically went to care for our vulnerable kids in our community. So.
Thank you.
I will add too, obviously, we did factor in inflationary increases. I don't know that anyone could have predicted in any way 5 years ago a 92% increase in the cost of care over a 5-year period.
And just to,
And if they did, I wouldn't have taken those numbers seriously.
right. And just to pile on to that, what you've also said is that the number of kids coming into care has increased as well.
Yes.
So it's not, it's cost of care, that is the primary driver, but it's also the number of kids that are coming into care. And those numbers are increasing because we had a bit of a,
The needs of those kids that are coming into care.
yes, which is to the cost of care. But the other piece is that we had a little bit of a leveling off as to the kids coming into care, and now we're seeing an increase there. So those two things combined have created this challenge for us. So to start out then, I want to thank the members of the TLRC that are here. Thank you for doing this volunteer work. Gwen McFarland's here, Rabbi Barr is here. I've recently talked to another member, Dr. O'Donnell, about some of the challenges here. It's a lot to ask of volunteer members. We've got a really smart group of people trying to help us figure this out, and I do want to thank them for their service to the county. When we talked about some of the recommendations that came out of the TLRC in 2021, when we were talking about the increase to the levy and some smart strategies that could be implemented, the TLRC came to us and said this prevention piece could not only be better for kids, but also help reduce costs. And so that was not only something that the TLRC embraced, but this commission embraced that and said, man, if we could keep kids safely at home, as opposed to having them enter a very expensive and a system that's not great for them because it's destabilizing, then let's try to do that. And the idea, and I remember this example being used where if the caseworker from JFS goes to into a home and the child is unsafe because there's no food in the refrigerator and the electricity is off, then instead of removing the child immediately, can we take care of the needs of that family, which is turn the lights on and get food in the refrigerator, because maybe it's not so much neglect and abuse, it's something different. It's stabilizing the family. And so that was the approach that we had talked about, this kind of wrap around the family kind of approach to try to prevent kids having to come into care. And I feel like that was the right approach. It's a different kind of approach, but I still feel as though there's value there, even though clearly we have not seen the kind of results that we had hoped for, which was a decrease in the number of the kids coming into care. We had a little bit of a flat line there for a while, but that is no longer the case. We also talked about all of these other things, diversifying the staff, increasing the number of individuals that are doing this work for JFS. We were losing people like crazy. And so we increased wages, but that's something that has to be sustained. It's not a one-time cost. We can't just pull that from somewhere and say, oh, we're going to use this for that. That is an ongoing cost that we need to pay for year after year. It is the right decision. Kids are safer today than they were 5 years ago in this community because caseworkers have lower caseloads and they're able to get around to those kids more frequently. So there was no question that that was better for the community, and that's something that we embarked on. At that time, we talked about the kids that are emancipating, they're aging out of the system and how destabilizing that is. And some of them were then thrown into homelessness. And so trying to tackle some of these really big issues. And then we talked about the prevention piece and the health and education for kids. So all of these things as strategies to keep kids safe and create a better community, to stabilize the community in the end. So I just want to say that while the TLRC was embracing those strategies, the commission was also embracing, as was JFS. I mean, this is something that was bubbling up from the administrators of JFS as well, and we recognize that some of these things might even save money in the long run, were it not to be for these other dynamics that you've talked about. So I want to put this in a larger context where we talk about what's going on here in Hamilton County and how it is reflected in what's going on in other counties in the state of Ohio. And so I want to ask a question on both fronts. So one is, when we talk about the state of Ohio, right, and how the state can be part of the solution here when it comes to the cost of care. You alluded to it. I want to dig in a little bit deeper because I too am trying to problem solve. I am trying to figure out, even if we were to need more dollars into this levy, what are we doing to strategize so that in 2 or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, we're not seeing this exponential increase still and in the same situation where we are today. We have to start thinking, I know we've been thinking internally, especially about strategies, but where's the state's role in all of this? And how do other states play in this space where they're trying to ameliorate some of the cost to the locals, which we see play out over and over again in many, many ways in the state of Ohio. And so what does that look like? And then in addition to that, I don't know if you know the answer to every county in the state is faced with these same issues. How are they dealing with the issues, and what are some of the strategies that we're seeing coming out from other places?
Yeah, Commissioner, so on the first question about the state, so I think the latest that we've gotten from the state is this idea of a rate card. So the idea would be that the state would work with providers, and they're actually actively gathering data right now. Hamilton County just compiled our data and sent it over to the state. So DCY is thinking of potentially coming up with what are called rate cards, statewide rate cards. So basically this would be the standard rate for all counties to pay for a particular level of care that a child might need. The implementation will, of course, happen maybe in a year and a half. The challenge is going to be is how enforceable it's going to be. So we're really watching it very closely. Our team is very much engaged in the conversation at a statewide level to really talk about how to solve this problem. Another idea that's been floated out is for metro counties to maybe work together and come up with kind of a buying consortium. So that's something that has been tossed around quite a lot of times. So I think we're waiting to see what the state will do, but there might be an opportunity for metro counties to coalesce around this issue together and work on a solution as well. So there's a couple of different options that are at the table for us to work on, Commissioner, in terms of rate setting from the state level. With regards to, I'm sorry.
The other counties, what are other county strategies?
So the other counties are in the exact same place that we are, because I think they're with the same issue. I think in terms of either having to go back and look at how they're doing placement, and some of them might be taking an approach that might be less than ideal for the kids, in terms of custody and how they manage custody. But we always try to put the kids in care safety first. And so, that of course comes with some more additional responsibility on the JFS side. So it's a little bit challenging. So we're really trying to balance safety along with being, really protective of taxpayer dollars as well, and be protective of the taxpayer.
So in one of your previous reports, I don't remember if it was a presentation or if it was a memo to us, you had a comparison with Hamilton County, Cuyahoga County, Franklin County, and showed, and I do think this is important because it shows we're generally behind when it comes to funding things in Hamilton County. That is true of the sales tax. I think it is true of this as well. And so I don't want to lose this idea that while other counties are struggling with some of these same dynamics, particularly when it comes to cost of care, they're a little ahead of us in many ways because they have already been pulling down dollars at a higher rate than we are. So could you resend that to us? I've lost track of it. I don't have it in front of me. But is your recollection that, because Cuyahoga, Franklin always has more than we do, by the way. But anyway, never mind. Lucas is another one, Summit, Montgomery, some of these other counties, they're all struggling with the same stuff, but some of them are starting in a different place than we are. And I think it's important to note that because I think the comparison is fair, right? What's everybody else doing and what's happening by way of comparison in Hamilton County?
I think you're seeing it throughout the county in all of, or throughout the state in all of the counties. It's a matter of timing in terms of as levies are coming up and being reviewed as far as the spotlights on them. But you are correct, and we did work with the consultants on something and our budget staff comparing levy millage and the amount it brings in and those details, and I can get that document updated and share that with the commissioners.
Yeah, I think sometimes in Hamilton County we start from behind. That's clearly true with sales tax and some of the other comparable revenue streams that we have here. We start from behind, and so we're always trying to play catch up when it comes to funding some of the mandated services here in Hamilton County. So I just wanted to point that out because we're a little behind, I think, on this one too. And then lastly, I was interested and intrigued by the charts that you had here at the end that talked about the different levels of increase were that to be necessary. And you've got a couple different scenarios here, and I appreciate the idea that the scenarios go down as opposed to up. But translate this for me if you know it. So in the first chart, second chart, and the third chart, what is the impact to the taxpayer?
I do not have the direct $100,000 home
That's what I'm
calculation
asking.
yet. I will tell you, just looking at it on paper, when you look at that maintaining of current service levels impact amount, going from an $81.6 million levy to adding $123.4 million, just felt to the TLRC, I think even to some extent with JFS and the administration, to be a burden that was too large.
It's too much.
If there was any way we could get under, we wanted to make sure we were considering that as well. And that's where we get to that $74 and $65 million options.
Understood. And I think you're not going to get any argument from me that we need to go as low as possible.
Yes.
I really, though, don't want to say in 3 years, oh, we undershot it, and now we got to go back and back and back to the we need to get strategic about this. I appreciate that we're trying to lower costs and keep this from inflating the way it has, particularly with what you just talked about with cost of care. Because when you look at the drivers, it's the number of kids in care and the cost of care.
Absolutely.
Those are the drivers, right? So if we can get some control over the cost of care and then do some of this, continue the preventive work to try to reduce these numbers, then we're starting to really make some progress here. So, and it really does make me think about what prevention strategies really do make that difference, because evidently some do and some don't. So we do need to think through that. All right, so maybe this is a John Bruggen question also about, because I agree that 123 is very high, and there is only so much we can ask the taxpayers to do. And I do want to point out, obviously, that if we were to decide that we need an increase in this levy, it'll go to the taxpayers. It's not up to this commission. We're not going to do this ourselves. We will put it in front of the taxpayers to make a decision. But I want to be real clear on what we're asking here and what this means to the average homeowner by way of the 74 or the 65 that are in front of us. So if you could get us that information as well, that would be extremely helpful. I think that's all I have. There's a lot of information here. We've been talking about this for a while. I do also want to recognize that the TLRC brought this to our attention last year and did raise the alarm. I remember that meeting when some of the members were in here saying, we've got a problem and we need to start thinking through this. So I appreciate the heads up really at that time. And then here we are thinking through what we actually need to ask the voters for. So I appreciate the information and look forward to a continuing conversation about this.
Thank you.
One tag on to Commissioner Dreehouse's comment. So one of the questions was about one of your initial questions was about the state, and I think John answered very directly some of the pragmatic things that the state is attempting to help with in terms of the development of rate cards, et cetera, that hopefully could help to use Commissioner Reese's term, stop the bleeding and help lower through economies of scale how much we're paying for out-of-home care. I do feel it's necessary to mention, though, in this same conversation, that as we are sitting here talking about the potential needs of additional property tax dollars locally to go to this issue, that the state of Ohio, amongst county administered systems where the counties are responsible for carrying out the functions of children's services, the state of Ohio is way on the low end of the spectrum in terms of the amount of money that is paid from the state to help with this issue directly. I'm not saying that it's going to resolve itself in time for the board to consider this question, only to say, though, that as we are continually called upon to make these decisions locally, and as those result in burdens to local taxpayers, other states do it differently. That results in a shifting of the burden to different sources, but nonetheless, one that requires less from local taxpayers. Maybe a longer-term conversation to have with our friends at the state, but I just wanted to make that dynamic clear as well.
Can I follow up on that, Commissioner? So that has been talked about at the County Commissioners Association, of course, and because we're all under the same pressures, and as we have seen, there is I don't know if it's a strategy so much as the state has continuously pushed the need to pay for mandated services, basic services, to the counties from the state. We see that related to schools. Now we're seeing it play out, and we've been seeing it play out in Child Protective Services. I think are we last in the country? I think we're last when it comes to funding for children's services. The state of Ohio is last. And so no wonder the locals have to pick up the cost because the state is not doing their part. I am not optimistic when I shouldn't be, and this is one of those that I'm not sure I should be, but it will be something that the county commissioners collectively advocate for, to say that the state has now put us in this position where we're asking for local taxes to go up because the state simply isn't paying in their fair share. So I appreciate that perspective, and again, another ongoing conversation at the state level. Thanks.
Thank you. And the state continues to, as was said, put us in that position. It's positive to think about the rate card and whether or not that will work, and how you said a year or two before we know about that. Just a few comments. We tried to meet the goals of the TLRC and the consultant in 2021, and they predicted, the consultant predicted we would be about there would be 24 million left, but what can we do with 24 million? I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's not related to our whole budget. So, and I'm gonna say it again, at the point we knew, not you guys, but when the consultant said it'll be 24 million in 5 years, we should have, what do we need to do different? And I understand those goals, 5 or 6 of them that TLRC gave, and you guys definitely have been accomplishing those goals. Secondly, as we were saying, the provider cost is higher. It's actually higher in the areas that are higher, like, the out of home. And so it's like the things that didn't cost as much are not level, because they're increasing too, but the ones that cost the most for services are the ones that are increasing. And I remember Mr. Patton saying about some of our providers don't even put in an RFP anymore. They just lay back and wait for us to say we need independent living, and then we have to call them, and then their prices are 3 times as much. So it's like supply and demand for sure. They know we need it, we have to have it, and they just raise their prices, which is ridiculous. And then you said earlier, 79% of the services are mandated that we have to do. And that's why we're looking at possible cuts. And the cuts that are coming would not be mandated services if we do make cuts. And if we're not able to make enough cuts, it would come out of our general fund, which is not good. That covers everybody in the county. I liked what you had in here. 9 out of 10 children achieved permanent reunification. So that tells me that all those services that we're trying to keep here, but sometimes we can't, they're working. 9 out of 10 children are able to go back to their family, maybe not immediate, but some kinship. This is working. And how do we continue that? I think the last thing I want to say, because everything has really been said. Those that are listening, don't think that we have money in buckets or pots in our offices or anywhere else. We do not have the money necessary to continue the services at the level that we need to continue them. So I said, I think my first meeting in January as president, I want everyone who's watching to listen, not just listen, hear what we're saying, read up on it, do your research. I know it was indicated that, Jeff, you came up with 100 million and 80 million, and so I'm not even concerned about Jeff. What I'm concerned about is given the vision that we have money here in the bank and everywhere else to make this happen. And we certainly don't want to be in this situation, but we are. So we're trying to look at the best way we can handle it without hitting those great agencies that do great work and without giving those children what they need. So if you have any questions, you can talk to our finance people. You can listen and hear what we're saying. We do not have the money necessary. You saw the data that's here. This is not made up data, okay? And so unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where it is, and we have to do something about it. Was said earlier, you have to do something about it. If we decide to put it on the ballot in May or November, you are the ones, the residents, the taxpayers are the ones that make the decision. But please make sure that your decision is well informed. That's all I have. Thank you for coming.
I had a question for Jeff, if you don't mind,
Okay.
before they leave. When we do the analysis on what the cost is, we always say $100,000 home. I don't know if those exist anymore I'd like for you all to get with the, potentially with the treasurer and the auditor's office. What is the average with the reassessment? What is the average cost of what people are paying now? I think that would be more realistic for people to understand as well.
We can run both.
I'm just going to ask, though, that we do both, because
Yeah.
we've always used a $100,000 home over the last 9 years that I've been here. So I think it's helpful to put apples to apples. I don't disagree that it would be also beneficial to have a higher, but I would prefer, I asked John this last time, let's do both, so that we've got the apples to apples from over the years.
Yeah, I just want to say 9 years ago, there were homes at $100,000. Thanks to the state, now because people ask me that all the time, why do y'all keep saying $100,000 home? Ain't no 100, I want to just make it more realistic of what you would be paying. So that's why I've just asked that question.
Absolutely, and I know the ballot language now lists the 100,000, that amount as well, to help residents with their own math as they're going to the ballot. That would be potentially the next steps from the commissioners. And I feel that the direction is there to go ahead and work with the auditor to get those calculations and share them with you as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Is there anything else to come before the board? I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Summer Dumas?
Yes.
Commissioner Reese?
Yes.
Commissioner Dreehouse?
Yes.